Robert E. Lee's final reflections on Gettysburg weren't written, they were whispered, just months before he died. And now they're finally uncovered. Did Lee truly believe the South could win? Or did he already see the end coming? What did Lee say in private that he never revealed publicly? In these rare, intimate memoranda recorded by William Allan, we get a haunting glimpse inside the mind of the man who led the Confederacy's greatest gamble and lost. Stay with me. But before we proceed to uncover Lee's haunting reflections, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this story already is interesting, click that subscribe button, because tomorrow I'm dropping something even more revealing that you won't want to miss. Interviews Lee gave in 1870. These interviews are actually memoranda based on conversations between Lee and a man named William Allan. Allan, whose life spanned from 1837 to 1889, was an academic who taught mathematics at Washington College, which of course was later renamed Washington and Lee University in honor of its president at the time, General Lee, who served from the close of the war until his death in October of 1870. Lee had personally invited Allan to join the faculty, and Allan had the credentials to back it up. A graduate of the University of Virginia and a former staff officer during the war, having served under Stonewall Jackson and Jubal early. He went on to author and co-author various books and articles about the Civil War and was a strong proponent of the lost cause ideology, a viewpoint he frequently promoted. Between 1868 and 1870, Allan jotted down notes from a series of conversations with Lee about the war. What drew me in most were Lee's reflections on Gettysburg, though all of Allan's notes are fascinating in their own right. Lee's remarks on Gettysburg appear in two separate entries, one from 1868 and another from 1870. I'd like to share both with you. These are transcriptions taken directly from the Encyclopedia of Virginia, a source I've used before and found consistently dependable. We'll begin with the later memorandum, dated February 19, 1870, just 8 months before Lee passed away. Allan recorded that Lee spoke with deep emotion about Gettysburg and remarked that much had been said about the dangers of bold maneuvers. But in his view, everything in our war was risky. He was often aware that he was taking significant chances, but believed he had no other viable options. Lee said he had urged President Davis before heading to Pennsylvania in 1863 to deploy General Beauregard to Manassas with all available troops to threaten Washington from that direction. Davis agreed in principle, but failed to follow through, possibly due to logistical constraints. Lee didn't expect much from the maneuver, but even a modest force under Beauregard could have caused a major diversion and had substantial psychological impact. Davis, however, opposed the Northern campaign, fearing Lee might be trapped. But Lee expressed no such concern. His main worry was Richmond. He believed that if his movements were carefully masked and executed swiftly, he could advance far enough north to pose a serious threat to Washington before the Union could react. Achieving this would alleviate concerns over Richmond's vulnerability. He did reach that objective, but ultimately failed at Gettysburg due to several factors. One key failure was Stuart's lack of reconnaissance, which misled him into engaging in a full-scale battle. He also lamented never being able to launch a unified assault. Lee said he often thought that if Jackson had been present, the outcome might have been very different. That concludes the first memorandum. The second, dated April 15, 1868, offers even more insight into Gettysburg. In it, Allan quotes Lee saying that he had no intention of initiating a major engagement in Pennsylvania, if it could be avoided. The Confederacy, he felt, lacked the strength to sustain an offensive war, and his forays into the North were strictly strategic, meant to support a broader defensive plan. Lee hadn't realized the Union Army was at Gettysburg. Stuart had been tasked with monitoring Union positions and reporting back, but failed to send any intelligence. Thus, Lee was caught by surprise and had no choice but to engage. Once committed, he aimed to win by mounting a decisive, simultaneous assault across the entire front. He tried everything over 3 days to achieve that without success. Ewell hesitated. Rodes, Early, and Johnson attacked in waves rather than in unison. Later, Longstreet and Hill were similarly out of sync. This piecemeal approach allowed Union forces to repel each attack. Still, Lee believed he inflicted greater losses than he received and disrupted the Union's summer campaign. On withdrawal, he had planned to cross the Potomac immediately, but swollen river levels delayed him, prompting him to dig around Hagerstown. He claimed he would not have minded if Meade had attacked him there, though he wasn't specifically trying to provoke it. Meade's failure to attack, Lee believed, revealed the extent of Union casualties. Lee defended his decision to enter Pennsylvania, saying it was preferable to remaining in Fredericksburg, where he had already repelled 2 attacks. He didn't want to stay there and risk another. The location was too vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. Grant, he noted, would later exploit this very weakness in his 1864 campaign. So Lee opted to go north to divert the Union, threaten Washington, and seize the initiative. It drew their attention away from Richmond and supplied his army in the process. He had hoped to land a critical blow without risking total engagement. However, he also believed he might be forced to fight before withdrawing, as retreating without battle would be difficult. Lee had no ambitions to occupy Pennsylvania permanently. He was deeply concerned about supply issues, particularly forage. His plan was to remain mobile, keep the Union anxious, strike where he could without triggering a full-scale battle, and eventually return south in the fall. But Stuart's failure to provide intelligence changed all that, and the disjointed way in which his corps commanders executed their attacks handed victory to the Union, though it was, as Lee described, a narrow one that trembled in the balance for 3 days. At one point, likely on the 2nd day, Lee consulted with Ewell and considered shifting the Second Corps to Longstreet's right to threaten Union supply lines near Baltimore. But both Ewell and Johnson believed their current position was strong and could be broken. Johnson struck early the next morning, but couldn't maintain momentum. Lee spoke with emotion about the criticisms he had faced, saying that many commentators spoke confidently about matters they barely understood. He insisted that he had fought with sincerity and dedication, always prioritizing the cause over personal fame or gain. He gave the example of General Joe Johnston, who was known for being overly sensitive to criticism, something Lee considered a poor trait. He also addressed a rumor about Longstreet claiming Lee had promised his generals not to fight in Pennsylvania. Lee dismissed this as absurd, stating unequivocally that he had made no such promise and had never even considered such a thing. So there you have it, Lee's wartime recollections as recorded by William Allan. 2 points in particular struck me. First, how remarkably similar Lee's own explanation of Gettysburg is to the dominant historical narrative we hear today. And second, the idea that he might have remained in Pennsylvania until the fall. Imagine that. Picture Lee still in the North, threatening Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, even Pittsburgh. What might that have looked like? Robert E. Lee's final words on Gettysburg were not declarations shouted across battlefields. They were quiet, conflicted reflections shared in hushed tones near the end of a long life. In those moments with William Allan, Lee wasn't a general giving orders. He was a man revisiting ghosts. So, what do we make of this? Was Lee's Pennsylvania campaign a brilliant strategic move derailed by miscommunication or the desperate gamble of a commander who already sensed the tide had turned? Did he fall because of flawed intelligence or because his vision of Southern victory was always a fading mirage? And perhaps the real question is this: if Lee had succeeded at Gettysburg, would the war have ended differently or merely prolonged the inevitable? One thing remains clear: these personal, unguarded thoughts reveal a man burdened not just by defeat, but by doubt, a man still wrestling with what might have been. He blamed no one, but regretted much. And in doing so, he gave us more than a battlefield report. He gave us a glimpse into the weight of command, the cost of loyalty, and the agony of hindsight. History often judges Lee through the lens of glory or failure, but maybe we should also remember him in this way, as a man trying, in the shadow of death, to make sense of a war that broke the nation he once tried to hold together. But what do you think? Was Gettysburg truly unwinnable for the South, or did Lee's own decisions doom his campaign before it began? Let us know in the comments. Because history isn't just in the past, it's in how we choose to remember it. Anyways, that wraps up today's journey into Lee's memoranda. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time on Irish History.